the question we're going to explore with Habibou and Tarunima is, what does it look like to explore pro-social alternatives that look at that policy, governance, and system level? Now, I'm joining you today from Brussels in Belgium, which is the heart of the European Union. And we have a regulatory framework called the Digital Services Act, which is moving towards a real reach towards addressing some of these systemic harms, notably around engagement-based ranking and recommender systems, or the kinds of default settings that make harm for women, girls, and young people more easy. We also at the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion see other jurisdictions, including some American state-level legislation, which is driving towards the ideas I shared from the blueprint, such as the Minnesota Algorithmic Transparency Act, which requires any social media platform with more than 10,000 users to disclose information about algorithms, user limits, and product experiments. Last year, we conducted some research across 8 countries in the Global South. This was done by Devika Malik, a member of the council, and she found that there was obstacles to really reaching towards what we call this upstream regulation or policy initiatives. And so we're going to talk today with Tarunima and Habibou about, from their experiences, what are they seeing and what might be some avenues for further work. So welcome, Tarunima. And I'm going to actually start with you, Habibou, of whether you see that harm is considered as a platform design issue in West Africa.
Thank you very much, Lena. Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Thank you. I am really happy to join you today. And just maybe to offer a quick context for those who are not familiar with Central Sahel, which is Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. You know, these countries have been dealing with overlapping crises, which include violent extremism, military coups, and intercommunal violence. And across all these challenges, you know, social media has played a really double-edged role. It has been used constructively in some ways to mobilize and inform, but more often it has been deepening division, spread disinformation, and undermine social cohesion. So the result is really a steady erosion of trust between citizens, between across communities, and also between people and their institutions. And in both public discourse and policy responses, the role of platform design have been largely invisible. And governments in the Sahel often use frame see harms from an external issues, from foreign misinformation or bad actors' role. And consequently, the response is to arrest or eliminate just these bad actors. And the focus is on law enforcement and censorship. So on the people and civil society side also, there is a big belief that we can get rid of fake news. That if we all keep fact checking, the internet will be true, will be safe. But that's not just the case in the region when you observe more. And the Bamako Forum on Digital and Social Cohesion, which we facilitate and I'm leading here across the region, was really a turning point. And leaders now start acknowledging that design, not just behavior, also matter a lot. And trust, identity, and social cohesion are harmed not just by people behavior, but also by system that amplify certain voice and silence other voice. So maybe I will stop here, Lena, and if you have any follow-up question, I will.
Great, great. No, thank you. And I think, earlier today that, that's what we were pointing to in terms of the research and the work into the blueprint is that people see these harms as bad people, bad users. And then the focus is really on that. Tarunima, what's your perspective of how you see that from India?
Yeah, actually, similar to Habibou, the experience in India has also been that there is a view or there's a perspective that the actors are bad, and the very limited understanding of design enabling harm is at the level of the internet, right? So we don't go beyond the fact that the internet so we don't go beyond the fact that the internet has enabled certain platforms that are designed in a way that nudge users to partake in certain harmful activities, whether it is towards themselves, whether it is towards other people in their communities. So we also in India see a lot of emphasis on sort of blocking or basically just banning the internet, or whenever there is a conflict, whenever there is we saw this most recently with the attacks. We just saw the government ask for complete internet shutdowns in parts of the country. Um, Whereas what we know even from our own research is that incentives do shape how people engage online. And so while you can design platforms to, incentivize polarizing, reactionary content, you can also have incentives so that people share accurate content. And this is the kind of design sort of emphasis or design governance that happens before content is shared, right? So a lot of our current regulation is trying to penalize or trying to address harmful content after things have been shared. And often at that stage, it's the harm is done, and we take this perspective of criminalizing whoever has shared content online while completely giving a free pass to the intermediaries. Um, yeah, or when not giving a free pass to the intermediaries, um, asking them to act in ways that only sort of concentrate power in political actors rather than distribute it with citizens.
No, thank you so much. Earlier this year, the Council on Tech and Social Cohesion published something called Prevention by Design, which was looking at how can you stop TFGBV actually before it gets online in the first place. So it just reminded me of that. But I want to come back to you, Tarunima. So we were speaking last week about some efforts that the Indian government has been able to do to make sure that financial related harms and abuse are curtailed through policy and legislation. So I'd wonder if you could share a little bit more about what have you noticed about the opportunities and the challenges of seeing the more sort of upstream platform regulation in a place like India. What's happened already? What can we learn from that? And what are some of the real obstacles that we see?
Yeah, I think it is interesting that the one place where we've seen a fair bit of discussion on, user experience, user interfaces that have promoted harmful behaviors, what is called dark patterns, has been in the context of financial scams. Now, interestingly, these scams have been happening since 2016, 2017. Ever since I would say, like, there has been internet, social media platforms, search engines. We've seen scams, but there was definitely a spike around the pandemic, and as finance in India got digitalized, there was a greater proliferation, and we saw a wide variety of scams. And I think even within scams, there are the kind of small ticket or small amount scams that affect the everyday Indian, right? But for where they are in terms of their earning potential or how much they make, that even that small amount is life changing, right? Like, it is It has consequences to their economic well-being. Sometimes it has consequences on their physical well-being. People have actually killed themselves as a consequence of falling for certain of these scams. And while we've been having some conversations around it, and there has been, so it's not hard laws, but there have been, for example, guidelines to platforms to try and address dark patterns. And I think similar to a question that someone in the audience, or a reflection that someone in the audience shared, I think the devil is still in the details, and those details are missing, but there is an intention to at least address and talk about dark patterns and get into the conversation of design of platforms. But I also think often a lot of this regulation comes about when someone who is sort of a very powerful. So in the case of India, it was a very notable businessman who got scammed of a very big, large amount of money. And it's actually when some of those incidents have happened that the conversation, or like the emphasis on addressing some of these issues, has increased. And I think the sort of both government as well as private sectors players have converged and put all their attention to either doing public service announcements or like addressing things around their design. But I do think for a long time, this entire issue, while we were seeing people falling prey, losing money, losing life as a consequence of platform design, it was not being addressed. But I think in the more recent past, we have seen some changes.
I want to come back to one thing again with you, Tarunima. As I said, you're a builder of technology, and earlier today when we were presenting a bit of the blueprint, we talked about the system, the monopolies, the lack of interoperability. Do you also feel like that's something that has potential, or do you see that there's actual real obstacles to moving in that direction? And again, Utah recently passed a law about interoperability, so there are initiatives out there in the world. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's actually where I see a lot of hope. I see a lot of opportunity with some of the alternate designs, and I see opportunity for platforms or governments calling for interoperability wherever they may be. Because just as DSA has some effect on other jurisdictions in the global majority as well, I think some calls for interoperability definitely, first of all, bring that idea into the mainstream, but also push for the possibility of these platforms. I think, again, so much of the regulation has focused on this blunt hammer approach of get rid of content, get rid of internet, that will address social harms. What actually we also need is like some conversations of like policy or positive approaches to policy that enable for alternates to exist, right? And so, for example, penalizing ad-driven models for social media enables other models to exist that can, for example, work on subscription, that can, work on, for example, maybe membership, right? So, like, there are all sorts of different models that we haven't even had a chance to see because the ad-driven model of social media has just been all pervasive. So I do see opportunities with some of the more recent calls around interoperability, and also some of the technical work that's been happening around decentralized or like federated systems. But I think global majority governments need to lean into that. So whether it is in terms of funding some of this research efforts, but also enabling some of these platforms to emerge from the global majority as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's interesting because the digital sovereignty trend in Europe right now is all about, enabling Europe-based enterprises to grow. And I can see exactly that same dynamic in India. I'm going to turn to you, Habibou. So you've been coordinating this Bamako forum, civil society, government, journalists, bloggers, all looking at how can we strengthen digital and social cohesion. What have you seen in terms of the ability to move towards pro-social tech design, policy or regulations, and the obstacles?
Okay, thank you again, Lena. Yeah, interesting question, because it's really a process I'm observing. Like since I start observing these issues, I'm seeing a kind of pathway people are following. And but the concept of regulations by design is still quite new, and I see opportunities specifically through the Bamako Forum, which bring the issue at a public discourse level and made the case, to grow, optimize design and make really the question on the public discourse. But still, the efforts are again fragmented and at their beginning. And again, like when like you see for the past 2 years, gathering civil society organizations into the same room, decision makers, regulators, security officials, cyber security actors. All of this really show that there is a growing interest to shift from considering the harms coming from only human behavior. And but it's a really slow work. In many cases, journalists and civil society also don't want to call like for a stronger government regulation, because in some cases they use it just for censorship and political control. So there is also this balance from civil society, which wants more but also is very sensitive to the context. And in the other hand, also the government official really, when you talk about people, there is a lack of technical capacity to understand algorithmic harms, to see how design system also, to see concretely how design is playing its role, not just human behavior.
Thank you. No, and I think that lack of trust that sometimes impedes a constructive discussion around regulation and accountability of the tech platforms by government is faced in many of the countries in the global south and even in the global north. Absolutely. So I want to go to one last question for both of you. Tarunima, when we were speaking last week, you said something I found really brilliant, which is that code is law. And that if we actually are better able to use middleware or plugins or different things that users can choose will shape their experiences online, well, then you don't need to put it into law. So I just wondered if that's an area where you find a bit of hope, where you feel is that, again, in this sort of shifting space, that we could actually be building better.
Yeah, thanks, Lena. Yeah, I think most technologists, especially the folks who were early on the internet, were often thinking about code as being the primary or the way of designing the tech system. So to be the primary way of nudging how people interact online, right? And I think in some ways the regulators have been slow to recognize this, but I think the technologists always recognize this. And so, yeah, I think for us, some of the work that we've been doing, the notable one is the URI project, trying to figure out if we as communities can come to our own, design of moderation systems, right? Which is like where so we work not with the average users, but we work with the people who've been targeted online, marginalized genders who've been targeted online, and we work with them to understand, okay, what are the words that feel, or what is the kind of content that feels harmful and abusive, and then you design a moderation system and a machine learning enabled detection system, and then we've deployed it through a plugin. And this is also some of the things that are very interesting that have emerged through our research is that people have told us that if it's if the moderation is happening at the level of the user and not at the level of the platform, they're not as worried about things like over moderation, because it doesn't get into the free speech discussion at all. And so we see a lot of potential for customizations or tools that allow people to take or have more agency in how they design their own social media experience. I think there is some limitation what we have also realized, and given again the weight or like the strength of the existing big platforms, it's very hard for some of these plugins and for some of these interoperable or alternate design tools to work with them. But I definitely see a potential, and I definitely see like if we were able to design infrastructures differently, some of these community oriented approaches and some of these, yeah, like you're calling middleware, right? Like I think a lot of those can actually also enable plurality of what pro-social means. And because also all of us will, we have different communities, we have different rules of engagement. What feels safe is different for all of us. And we can coexist despite our disagreements, right? And we've observed this even in the creation of the moderation tool, which is that often the activists will not agree on what constitutes abuse, but there is space to account for that disagreement in design tools as well.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant. And again, I think, user autonomy and the ability of users to choose is something as well that's coming into more and more regulation. So last question to Habibou. Through the work of the Bamako Forum and Search for Common Ground across the region, there is a lot of efforts to shift the norms and to shift what's acceptable behavior about how people interact with these harms, recognizing that it's a highly divided and violent context. What is it that you've seen, perhaps one or two of the most effective things?
Yeah, so really when I come back to the work of Search for Common Ground across the region, maybe I can give just two examples, which really when I look at them, I think this shifts of thinking the harm and also thinking the best ways to answer come from these two examples. First of all, at the community level, I observed the cyber guardians working to train youth across the Sahel, to counter misinformation, to build civic trust, and to teach prosocial habits. And this is very important as it's come from the people who are experimenting this conflict and these challenges and seeing how it's affecting them directly. And I see a lot of community level momentum engagement to think beyond human behavior, but think about how all actors, including tech companies, also should take into account their role, specifically in terms of accountability. So the other example also I am observing is now at the policy level, discussion going on specifically through the Bamako Forum. And currently at the region there is this concept of sovereignty, which is also called for, again, digital sovereignty, and people at state level, state actors, want just to not be consumers, but to participate in the norm designing, which include regional collaboration through ECOWAS, a lot of engagement through UNESCO at the regional level. I think all of this give hope of rethinking the norms in a multi-stakeholders approach, and that's make me think that coming years we will be able to see the harms not just from human but from everyone, and then make everyone accountable, and each actors participate to designing the norms and the responses.
Wonderful. Thank you, Habibou. And I just want to acknowledge, Guy in the questions, it just talks again to some of these challenges of the power imbalance between tech companies and some of these governments in smaller countries, and how do we overcome that? And, I think there's some initiatives with UNESCO and other groups across Africa. I think Asia is much more complicated. And so it's, I think it's really a good question. If any of the panelists want to share more thoughts or more links to Guy's question in the Q&A, please do. But I think that's really part of the dynamic here. Thank you so much, Tarunima and Habibou, for joining us. We look forward to continuing this. Again, the Council has hubs, including one on pro-social tech policy globally. And so if any of you that are online or in the room would like to join the Council, we'll share more about that at the end so that we can look together at this question. Thank you so much. And back to you, Himanshu.